Within a lot of my videos, I heavily criticize certain design choices that have been implemented within Generation 5 specifically. The Clutch Claw is a key example here, with how it becomes a dominating factor within a hunt through the softening mechanic and wall bangs, something I believed could have been a better inclusion if it was a more limited tool overall, similar to features like mantles seen in Monster Hunter World. Another example could be how Wyvern Riding is force-fed to players who are progressing through a hunt with their included Silkbind abilities, and how the power of Wyvern Riding trivializes certain features overall like the invaders and the invasion mechanic. Or how 4-player hunts in Rise are generally a cluttered mess due to all of the player hit effects compounded on top of the player, Palico or Palamutes who are attacking as well. Well, what if I told you that a number of those grievances seems to be getting remedied within Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak? That certain things like wall bangs are making their return without the Clutch Claw, or that soon multiplayer hunts are going to be much easier to perceive. Sunbreak is looking to improve in ways that we haven't seen thus far. Criticisms for both World and Rise specifically are seeing fixes that I hope to be fairly optimal overall, and that could reinvigorate mechanics that were first met with disdain. So today I'd like to discuss a few of those with you and go over how I believe it shows the development team attempting to improve in many aspects where World and Rise fell unfortunately short, starting with the Clutch Claw. As I've mentioned many times in the past, the introduction of the Clutch Claw was met with a fair bit of disdain throughout the better part of the Monster Hunter community, and this was for a few reasons. The biggest reason was the softening mechanic, which acted as a way of creating weak points on specific monster parts in order to deal greater damage. This softening mechanic could be applied through 1 attack for heavier weapons and 2 attacks for smaller ones, but there's various nuances within that, such as regular attacks being used while clutched to get a soften faster, as well as the implementation of the Clutch Claw boost armor skill late into the life of Iceborne. I think it's fairly apparent to the developers at the time that the Clutch Claw had a few significant issues in terms of player enjoyability, and Claw Boost was one band-aid fix onto that before Iceborne was done updating entirely. Softening wasn't the only issue, however. Players could also launch monsters into walls by firing off their slinger ammo while clutched to a monster's head, thus producing a wall bang. Wall bangs were an incredibly powerful mechanic. Not only would they deal high damage, but they would also topple the monster, leaving it on the ground for a large opening. This made Clutch Claw highly abusable and extremely prevalent within a hunt. In fact, hunts began to play more around effective use of the claw rather than the effective use of the player's weapon. Although not entirely, you still have to be able to play the game. Community members have even tried to fix this themselves. The Ice mod, or Iceborne Community Edition overhaul, has looked to balance the claw and weapons in a way where the claw is less necessary for an enjoyable and speedy experience. My personal fix for this issue was to remove the prevalence of the claw entirely by making it hyper-limited. If mantles were a tool we could equip with limited slots that were only active for a limited time and had a cooldown period, why couldn't we have something similar to that with the claw? Sunbreak looks to answer that question. While we don't currently know all of the details, a recent trailer showed off new endemic life, including that of the puppet spider's close relative, the marionette spider. While puppet spiders are used to force a wyvern ride state on a monster, the marionette spider seems to be used to launch a monster within a given direction. Within the footage, we see this performed as a Tigrex is launched into a rock head that crumbles with the collision and also sends the Tigrex reeling backward. The official Rise site even states that this could potentially lead to a topple. This is eerily similar to that of wallbangs from Monster Hunter World Iceborne, and while we see no damage numbers in the footage, there is a strong chance that this will simply be the mechanic we know from the previous iteration. What makes this so interesting is that it is essentially taking one of the strongest concepts of the Clutch Claw and removing it from the player's base equipment. Now this mechanic is limited through the collection of endemic life. You may be able to find 1 or 2 marionette spiders within a hunt leading to 1 or 2 wall bangs, but it's no longer going to be a main strategy that lasts throughout the entire encounter. This also seems to mean that the softening mechanic has been dropped entirely. While we still need to wait for all of the details, breaking up the Clutch Claw's many features into individual tools through the use of endemic life is a huge improvement, as fights still hold a focus between a monster and a hunter and their weapon, as well as the limited resources within their inventory. Well, not so limited anymore thanks to camps, but you get the idea. It's possible softening will come back as well, just through another endemic life or tool, so it'll be interesting to see how they implement it if they do, since it seems the developers have a proper understanding that certain mechanics need to be limited to make them more impactful within a hunt. Wallbangs aren't the only other rework or quality of life inclusion that we've had presented to us before release. One of my major gripes with Rise's online capabilities was that for 4-player hunts could feel particularly difficult to focus on, due to the party consisting of 4 hunters plus a combination of 4 palicos or palamutes. Rise is full of performative flair, with grand hit and particle effects that help add to the presentation of the overall experience. The one issue is that combined, all of these effects can take up a huge portion of what you are able to perceive on the screen. This can make seeing the monster itself fairly difficult, or make it harder to reposition and avoid fellow hunters. There can simply be too much going on, and this is something I've wanted to see be remedied for some time. Final Fantasy XIV did this perfectly. You can change the level of intensity for party effects or your personal effects to balance out the experience to your personal preference. This is now possible in Rise, with a setting that will allow you to see hit effects to a certain percentage and altogether make the game more clear based on what you find the easiest or best to work with while engaging in multiplayer. It's another example of the developers either listening to player grievances or simply realizing these issues for themselves via hindsight, which allows us to see bigger improvements and a smoother gameplay experience overall. This is what I would call growing pains. The development team has tried to do a lot with World and Rise, as it has been such a big jump from Generation 4, and while it's admirable to see a lot of new inclusions and mechanics added on top of higher graphical fidelity and larger maps, these can sometimes fall flat or be more intrusive than they were ever intended to be, and this is just another example of the development team remedying a flaw. Movement is being improved as well. A major issue with wall running in Rise was that the player would have to expend a wire bug, or at least attempt to expend a wire bug, in order to initiate a wall run. This means that if you wanted to begin a wall run while on the ground, you would have to immediately waste one of your wire bugs before even beginning traversal. And if you have no wire bugs, you still have to clunkily hop upward to the wall so that the wall run would trigger. We have already seen this be confirmed as a change in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak via a demonstration and interview with the developers. No longer are wire bugs required to initiate a wall run. Now simply running toward a wall will begin the process, meaning the player has more options and maneuverability from the get-go regardless of how they start wall running, whether that be from the air or the ground. One thing I would personally like to see added as well is the ability for hunters to wire dash mid-air into a wall and begin a wall run afterward. Currently, if you dash in the air, no wall run will trigger, and this has always bothered me. I don't know if it's an intended effect or not, as a way to balance the overall maneuverability, but I absolutely hate shooting myself forward toward a wall and then simply sliding down the entire cliffside and having to start all over. Finally, one major potential change that we don't have all information on currently is a key improvement that could be implemented within Rise involving Wyvern Riding. In a tweet from the official Monster Hunter account, we are shown new menu settings. One of these settings is labeled Button for Wyvern Riding, with the currently selected option being Attack or A. If this setting is what most people theorize it to be, it's potentially going to allow us to turn off the ability to initiate the Wyvern Ride through attacking. This could be huge for people that find Wyvern Riding to be more intrusive than useful. It would potentially allow the hunter to continue attacking a rideable monster rather than initiating the ride, and would make the ride state effectively an additional topple. Many players could potentially output just as much damage with their weapon themselves during a topple rather than constantly throwing a monster into a wall. It's really up to player discretion, but overall could potentially be an amazing option for players that want it, without removing the concept of Wyvern Riding entirely. You still get the option to ride if you want, but if you don't want to, you won't lose out on any damage. That's unfortunately just wishful thinking at this time, but what else could this option potentially mean? I'm legitimately asking, like, what else could it mean? While I personally have had a lot to criticize about Generation 5, it isn't something I believe to be a lost cause by any means. In fact, I really do enjoy it. As I mentioned, I think this huge shift in design direction and the upgrades possible due to hardware came with a large subset of growing pains. You can't expect a tried and true series to take such a large leap into new territory without there being a few issues here and there, some of those issues even being incredibly major. That's why I am overall pleased to see Sunbreak acknowledge acknowledge these criticisms. I'm not vain enough to think that they saw my criticisms specifically, but it does show that the developers are aware and capable of pointing out these design issues themselves and then iterate onto them within future releases. Sunbreak could potentially be one of the best entries within Generation 5 and also the best example of quality of life features and reworkings of past mechanics. There's a lot to be hopeful for here. What else from previous iterations of the series, mostly from World, Iceborne, and Rise, would you like to see either re-implemented or improved on? I saw one individual mention to me how HUD sizing and customizability would be a great feature to have overall, especially on PC, and I have to say I agree with that. I personally am happy to see many of my own gripes within Generation 5 slowly be improved on. Even if it's not everything, I can be content knowing that the series seems to be going in the right direction in terms of mechanics. I think I'm potentially most curious with what they'll change in terms of rampages. Additionally, we have a slew of new Silkbind attacks included within Sunbreak. The animation of one in particular is incredibly similar to Chaos Oil for the Sword and Shield. Could this mean the reintroduction of oils as a mechanic moving forward? If you enjoyed this short video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Please let me know what you want to see fixed, changed, or included. What major mechanics and changes does Sunbreak absolutely need in your opinion? Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.